Well, Light, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
You're so sweet. No, it's my honor to have you. I'm super excited to be talking to you. I want to talk about, man, you are a prolific writer. You have 4 books out now. Is that right?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it
Four?
prolific, but yeah, I've written a few books.
You know
Like
why it
Deepak
sounds
Chopra has written 100 books. I would say that's prolific.
Well, listen, from where I'm sitting, I've been
Right.
trying
From
to
where
get
the average person is, sure, it's prolific.
It feels like a lot to me. I've been wrestling with this manuscript of my own for a while now. I just got my edits back from a developmental editor, and I'm just like wrestling with this. So, congratulations on finishing 4 books. That is no small feat.
And congrats
Um,
to you on getting that process underway. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's been, I don't know how you feel about your writing process, but for me, it's about really digging deep and then
Mhm.
refining these ideas I have. The topic of my book is a 12-step guide for skeptics. There's a lot of barriers to entry when it comes to that 12-step world. There's a lot
Yeah.
of things that people balk at, which I totally understand. A lot of it is like very valid, admitting you're an alcoholic or this idea of powerlessness. And so my attempt is to offer sort of context and perspective to these ideas so that they could get the benefit of the process, right?
Mhm.
Um, and one of the tenets of the 12 steps is about prayer and meditation. And when I like to watch Rich Roll's interviews. It's so well produced. He's amazing. I just love him. I admire him so much.
Mhm.
And so you've been on 4 times now, is that right?
Yeah, 4 times. I'm so fortunate to have that.
He loves
Four.
you. He loves you. We
I
all love
bug
you
him. I
now.
bug him a lot to get on this podcast.
Do you really?
Yeah.
That's kind of encouraging to hear
Mhm.
because I know he loves you, but I'm sure he's a busy guy with a lot of requests, but
Yes.
I found that your conversations around finding purpose and really finding a way to practice meditation. I found that I've actually been practicing some of your ideas around meditation because, I was taught, focus on your breath. It sort of like have these let go. It's like there's like all these instructions and then when I heard you, I'm going to let you tell the story, but when I heard your way of thinking about meditation, I was like, I could tell, like I just meditated before we got on here today. I was like, I better do my homework.
Mhm.
But it was like so much easier with through your lens of it was just so much easier. Why don't you tell me a little bit about because a lot of your books, Travel Light was the audiobook that I listened to recently. But you also have Knowing Where to Look, The Inner Gym, which is a 30-day workout for strengthening happiness, love, and then Bliss More. I still need to get that one. But it seems like these are books that are meeting people where they're at
Mhm.
and then introducing solutions that often are in line. They're about meditation and being present. So
Mhm.
maybe you can kind of help us dispel maybe some of the myths around what meditation really is and how to practice it in an easier way.
Sure. First, I want to just give um, credit to my teachers because I had some really good teachers when it came to the practice of meditation. And I struggled a lot. I struggled for years when I first started out dabbling in meditation. And I tried all these different styles, and I just never really found a style that felt natural and organic. And it got to the point where I just didn't even understand how anybody could associate the experience of bliss with meditation or nirvana, and these kinds of terms that you hear all the time associated with meditation. Because to me, it just felt like I was just sitting there staring at the back of my eyelids. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, literally 22 years ago this month, I met the man who became my sort of long-term meditation teacher, and he's the one that first introduced me to this what he called a householder's style of meditation. And at the time, I had no idea that there were different styles for different people. I just thought everybody tried to fit into whatever people were calling meditation. But apparently, most of the meditations that people do that feel tedious and laborious are classified as monastic traditions of meditation. And the reason it feels tedious is because if you're not practicing as a monk, then that style was never really intended for you as a regular person or householder. And so there were styles um, that were purpose created for householders. And in those styles, you don't have to sit with your legs crossed. You don't have to sit on a cushion. You don't have to sit with your back straight. You don't have to have your shoulders back, your fingers together. You don't have to focus on your breathing. Notice your thoughts like clouds in the sky. You don't have to let go of your expectations, witness anything, imagine anything, concentrate, contemplate. You don't have to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
And when you get all that stuff out of the experience, it actually becomes quite enjoyable. And so when I started practicing in that way, in February of 2002, that's when I had my first taste of bliss and of nirvana. And
Mm.
that's when I became really hooked on meditation.
And your meditation teacher you're referring to, was that Tom Knowles?
Tom knows, yeah, that's
How
the
did how
man.
did you meet Tom?
That's a good question. I met Tom through okay, so I'll tell you a story. So I
I
was in
love stories.
I was living in New York prior to 2002, and I was working in fashion. I was a model. And I met this girl who worked for Kenneth Cole in their marketing. That she was the vice president of marketing, and I was doing like a fashion show for Kenneth Cole. So she and I met.
You
She was very
fancy.
attractive. We ended up connecting. We became boyfriend and girlfriend.
Oh,
She lived on the Upper East Side. I lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, right? And in between the East and West Side is Central Park. So I started doing yoga at Equinox, the very first Equinox
oh, at
in Detroit,
Equinox.
in
Wow.
76 in Amsterdam in Manhattan. And I started doing yoga there, and I became a yogi, and I started getting her into, she had never done yoga before. So I started bringing her to my yoga classes.
Wow.
And then she went to this other gym in her neighborhood, and she comes home one day and she goes, "Oh my God, I went to this amazing yoga class. You have to come." And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I'm the yogi. You're not the yogi. I invite you to classes. You don't invite me to classes. What do you know about yoga? That's what I'm thinking in my mind.
Little
But
ego.
what she hears me go is, okay, I'll come. One of those lackluster, you know,
Fine.
yeah, exactly. But I kept dragging my feet. And then how couples are, the woman just keeps going and going and going. She doesn't forget. And so finally I relent and I say, okay, I'll come to your
You
class tonight.
caved.
Right. So I turn up at the class, and I'm the last person there. It's already started because you could, just energetically, I didn't really want to be there.
Oh, yeah.
But I went in this class. It was very dark. The teacher kept the lights out, and there were like Christmas tree lights along the sides of the classes. It was packed. And it turned out to be a really good class, just like she said. And I thought, wow, that was a really amazing class.
You mean she was right?
She was right. And the teacher, who I never really saw, this Australian guy, I didn't see him because it was so dark in there.
Oh,
He had a really strong presence. So
oh,
anyway, never went back to the class because again, it was inconvenient, and I experienced it. I
yeah.
validated her whole experience with the class, but I still enjoyed my classes as well. Cut to 3 years later, she and I break up, and I have to leave New York because everything is reminding me of her. and
Mm.
and so I decide I'm going to go to the epicenter of spirituality in America, which is, drum roll please, Los Angeles.
Spiritual.
So I get to Los Angeles, and now I'm thinking, okay, I don't want to do this fashion thing anymore. Now I want to become a yoga teacher. And I'm living in West Hollywood, and I go to Crunch Gym in West Hollywood. Anyone who lives in West Hollywood knows the Crunch on Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
And I get a free pass because I just want to do as much yoga as possible. I just want to go to their yoga classes just to kind of see what the vibe is like on the West Coast. Because now I'm like full blown yogi at this point. And I'm
Had you
looking
been
at the
certified
schedule.
already?
No, 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 no. I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
practicing. I'm just
Okay.
practicing. I
Okay.
have an intention of doing a yoga teacher training, but I hadn't gotten that far yet. So I just pick a class that was a good time for me the next day. And turns out it's the same guy from New York, the Australian guy from New
That's
York.
wild.
And I went up to him at the end of the class and I said, I think I went to your class in New York. He goes, yeah, I remember you. I was like, really? You remember? How do you remember? This was like years ago. He goes, because you came with that girl and I had a crush on that girl. So I was disappointed when you showed up in the class. So he and I became fast friends and he became my meditation buddy. He was the only person that I knew who was enthusiastic about meditation, right? Every
Yeah.
time we hung out, he would always pop the question, have you meditated yet? Which case I hadn't usually, because to me it was torture. And he would
Mm.
say, let's meditate. And we'd be meditating in his living room or sometimes in a car, sometimes out in the grass somewhere when we're going out for a hike. And I would peek over at him and he'd just be sitting there with this little smile on his face, like he was having the most delightful time. And then one day, like months after we met, he goes, yeah, my meditation teacher's coming to Los Angeles to teach some of my yoga students. And this was like the weirdest thing because we had talked about everything under the sun, right? Just like guys do. But he had never once mentioned that he had a meditation teacher. And so this really got my attention because, again, I had seen him look like he was enjoying meditation way more than I was. So I go to his apartment one night in February, actually it was 2003, to meet this meditation teacher and that's where I met Tom Knowles. Ended up being Tom Knowles, and
Wow.
that became my sort of gateway or on ramp to everything that I'm doing now. In fact, within 10 minutes, I knew I was destined to become a meditation teacher, just because I just the vibe that I felt in Tom's presence was so strong that I just knew that this was meant to be my path. So that's
In
kind of
10, was that something that you just felt like it was always in you and then just meeting him and
no, not at
hearing him?
all. Not at all. But that's
No.
what's so interesting about the path, like we look at we think about what we want to achieve and we kind of imagine this linear path to achieving it. And
Hmm.
really, if I hadn't been modeling and if I hadn't gone on that casting to the Kenneth Cole fashion show, if I hadn't met the marketing director, actually, it wasn't even her, it was the PR person who introduced me to the marketing director, and you can keep going back. If I hadn't taken this other leap of faith and ended up in New York, if I hadn't done this and done that, and so I can trace it all the way back to being born. Which just goes to show that we're all on our own path whether we realize it or not, and that's kind of the overall theme of a lot of the writing that I do these days.
Yeah, all about following your path. I've been hearing you talk a lot about the still small voice inside,
Mhm.
and that really struck a chord with me because when people first get sober, there's this whole identity shift, right? It's like I used to be this party girl, and then I became like the sober girl, and I had to sort of redefine my identity. And it took me quite a while to sort of step into something new that I felt comfortable in. But I'm 55 now, and I feel like I have had a few iterations of this sort of stepping into sort of like the new identity. And I feel like during these transitions, it's hard to listen to that still small voice. I feel like I'm in the hallway now where I'm like, what is my next? What is my next? Which is why I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to talk to Light Watkins about this because it's all around listening to that still small voice. And
Yeah.
it's just I feel like there's so much coming at us at all times. like I'm an information junkie, and I heard you talking about, doing less is the way to hear that voice. How do you think of like what's a good way to think of getting to that place where you can hear that still small voice?
Sure. Yeah. The analogy that I use in my book, Travel Light, which is my most recent book,
Super good.
is a sports arena. If you imagine yourself like at a basketball game, you know how in the basketball games, they always show all the celebrities sitting along the court side and
Yeah.
all the fancy people are down at where the court is. And then all
Yeah.
I guess the people don't have as much or it's been the nosebleeds.
All the regulars.
The regular folks. Yeah. So I equate that with the still small voice and all of the other voices that are in and around our awareness, right? So
Yeah.
the still small voice is kind of like the people in the nosebleeds. And the fear voice and the voice of social conditioning, the voice of your parents, your coaches, your priest, your neighbors, your coworkers, whatever media you consume, your echo chamber. Those are usually the voices that are kind of like the people sitting on court side, right? So if you're a player in the game and if everybody's shouting at the same pitch, you're going to hear the people who are courtside much louder than you're going to hear somebody up in the nosebleeds. And so the way it works with our internal voices is the voices that we pay the most attention to are the loudest, and the ones that we
Mm.
tend to ignore the most are the quietest. So that's one of the reasons why they call it the still small voice. It's just because living on planet Earth, that voice that may have been a lot louder when you were younger gets conditioned out of you. It gets beat out of you, and people indoctrinate you to being afraid and considering cautionary tales of people who basically stepped outside of the box, went outside of the box and what happened to them and why you have to play it safe. And so those are the floor seats. And so again, the still small voice is there, you just can't really hear it. It's too far away. So
Yeah.
what you have to do is you have to split test. When you think you are hearing your still small voice, you have to follow it. And if you follow it, the more you follow it, the closer the voice will start to come. In other words, the louder it will start to get. And then eventually it'll switch places with the fear voice and the social conditioning voice that's sitting at the floor seats. And then it becomes this undeniably loud and annoying voice, right? Which you can
Mm.
call your inner guidance, you can call it your intuition, you can call it your heart voice. But it's this voice that when you follow it, it's going to be scary. It's going to require you to take a leap of faith because you're not going to know how it's going to turn out. But just the act of following it makes you feel expansive versus
Mm.
when you follow your fear voice and when you're trying to play it safe, what that really means is you're having to contract. You're having to play small in some way. And we all know how that feels when you have something that's on your heart and you want to express it, but then you choose not to because somebody else's energy who's probably like displaying narcissistic tendencies is bigger in the room in the space that you're in, and you just kind of
Mm.
feel that icky, you know, just that ick. And
Oh yeah.
you don't want to be around that. You don't want to be around that person, but maybe you're in a situation where you can't not be around that. So then you
Mhm.
just start to feel off all the time. And then you start to default to feeling anxious around that situation and or depressed around that situation, meaning circumstantial
Mm.
depression.
Yeah.
And you may that may start to manifest itself more and more physically, where you can't sleep at night because you're just thinking about that situation, and other people start reminding you about that person and that situation, and you find yourself projecting your feelings onto them because they triggered you. And so that's the kind of direction it can go in if it's unchecked. And you can become sort of like a walking talking pressure cooker about to
Yeah.
explode at any moment. And that's the effects of stress. So all the inner work does is it gives you a way to release that stress and to kind of um, hone back in on the voice of inner guidance, which is probably going to have you taking some sort of leap out of that situation, which you could have done the whole time, but you were afraid, because of
Yeah.
whatever the fears were that have been working on your psyche all this time. So practices like meditation, which I talk about a lot,
Mm,
they give you access to your inner guidance, and the way you are indeed accessing it is you're able to adapt to change, and you're able to take more leaps of faith, and that's really the best measure of progress. It doesn't mean that you're going to experience certainty. It doesn't mean you're going to be more comfortable necessarily. You will be more comfortable in discomfort, right?
mm,
And you will be more intrigued by that voice of inner guidance that's prompting you to move in the direction of expansion versus contraction. And so from there, really fun, adventurous things can happen. And that's where you get the best stories of your life. And if you don't choose to follow your inner guidance, you end up creating more complication in your life. There is no neutral path. This is a big
mm.
misconception that by
Yeah.
not making a choice, things will be neutral. No, the neutral path is complication. You're creating complication. So you're either creating complication or you're moving in the direction of adventure. Okay. That's what following your inner voice allows you to do more of.
Yeah, adventure can be so scary though.
It's not as scary as complication.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like we can all get to that place. Like I know in my own personal life, it's like sometimes I just, like for me, the podcast was listening to the still small voice. It was like a desire on my heart. I started it in 2016. And I was actually really afraid to do the podcast because in my community, there were, I was in a 12-step community, and I was worried that if I started sharing stories about sobriety, that I might be in trouble, get in trouble with my community. But it was such a desire on my heart that I couldn't, like, the voice got louder and louder and louder. And then I had this experience where a girlfriend of mine, she and I used to go to the 6 a.m. meeting together. And she was at the meeting and she died in a car accident 3 hours later. And she and I
Mm.
were about the same age. And I really saw a lot of myself in her. And I thought, you know what? I can't not follow this intuition that I had to do the podcast. And I mean, life is short, right? And so I just had to trust my gut that this was the right thing to do. Um, and it's been great. I know I get to talk to people like you and just people who are really trying to make a difference in the world, but it was really a leap of faith for me. And I've heard some of your stories about taking that leap. Maybe you could share some stories around, like, I heard you tell a story around moving. I think it was you were supposed to take a flight to Paris, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so that actually is what landed me in New York in the first place. Okay, so long story short,
You can go long story long if you want to.
long story short, I was I was working in advertising right after college, and I looked around the ad agency in Chicago, and I just didn't really see myself being there for as long as a lot of the other people had been there, because they just nobody really seemed. When I met my meditation teacher, one of the things
Mhm.
that attracted me to him was he genuinely seemed fulfilled. In other words,
Mm,
he didn't seem like he was waiting on anything to happen in the future that was going to make him happier than he was in that moment. And when
yeah.
and I didn't know that that was what I was looking for until I met him, until I saw somebody actually embody that sense of fulfillment. And in that ad agency, I didn't realize that that's what I was averse to, was the fact that nobody really seemed particularly fulfilled. They were all sort of
Mm,
working towards something that was, going to make them. happier in the future. I now I look back and I call it the acquisitive approach to happiness. As soon as I get a promotion,
Mm,
as soon as I make creative director, as soon as I make another $10,000, as soon as I'm able to buy a better house, as soon as I'm able to get married, have kids, get divorced, sell my company, right? And it just keeps going on and on and on. And we
yeah.
keep playing this game thinking that some achievement in the future is going to make us more fulfilled than I'm able to be in this moment. And my happiness is just around the corner as soon as it happens. So again, I didn't have the language for this. I just kind of felt uninspired in this in
Mm,
this place. And it was a really good job. I was an art director, and which was what I felt like I wanted to do from since being in college. Any case, I go and I resign after 3 months, and I don't know what I'm going to do. This is my first sort of major leap of faith where I just literally don't have a backup plan. And I decided to throw my hat into modeling, start modeling. Now, at the time, I didn't know that in order to become a model, you usually got discovered. Like somebody came up to you in Target or in the shopping mall and they said, "Hey, have you ever thought about modeling? Hey, I have an agency," and they give you a contract. That's not how it happened for me. For me, I just went to agencies and said, "Hey, I would like to be a model now. I'm ready to be a model," which is not how it usually goes.
that's
So
not
I
how it
got
goes.
rejected. I got rejected by everybody twice, and
That's so painful.
yeah, it was. But I decided to. I'm giving you the composite version of the story. I decided to go to Paris. I met this guy from Paris who did tell me, "Hey, I think you do well in Paris."
This is cool.
And what I heard was, "Come to Paris. Paris is where you're going to become a superstar." So I used my last little money. I didn't have a lot of money. I got a one-way ticket to Paris, and it connected through Newark Airport, right? From Chicago. So I turn up at Newark. This is my first time really being nomadic too. I got rid of everything when I was
Oh,
living in Chicago, and all I had was a duffel bag. All my life's possessions were in this duffel bag.
wow.
And so I'm sitting there at the gate in Newark waiting for my flight to Paris to start boarding. It's packed with French natives, and they made an announcement. "We've oversold the flight. We're looking for people to give up their seat." So I didn't have anyone expecting me. So I figured I would go give up my seat. They were doing it in exchange for, I think it was like a $400 flight voucher or something like that.
That's a pretty good deal.
Right. So I got the flight voucher. So now I have enough money to come back if I needed to. And they put me up for the night at this hotel. They gave me a couple meal
Wow.
vouchers, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
So I come back the next night to the same gate. It's only one flight a day, apparently. And it's the same song, second verse. They make the announcement: "We've oversold the flight. We're looking for volunteers. Flight vouchers now are like $500." I shot up, went to the desk, got another voucher. So now I have almost $1,000 in flight credit that I
Amazing.
could use to come back if I ever needed to. Okay. So again, I didn't have a plan on how I was going to get back when I first made this trip. When I
So
first booked
brave.
this trip. So then the third night, come back, same thing. We need volunteers. I give up my seat, and everybody boarded the flight. And I was literally the last person to board the flight. They had one
Wow.
seat left. And the flight was scheduled to land in Paris at like 9 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
So as soon as I land, I go to um, this hostel. And again, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. I go to the hostel to check in. I had a book called Paris on a Budget or something, because this is way before smartphones. This is like in the 1996 or something like that.
Oh my goodness.
And if you show up at a hotel or anywhere before 3 o'clock, they're going to be like, "Hey, you can't check in yet.
Right.
You got to come back at 3 o'clock." So I didn't know this. So I said, "Okay." I put my stuff in their storage locker, and I got my modeling portfolio, and I went to one of the agencies, the first agency on my list, where the guy that told me I would do well in Paris happened to work. He was out of town when I got there. So they took my book, they took it into the back, they brought it back out within like 30 seconds and said, we're not interested in you. Come back in a few months, perhaps. They didn't know I went through this whole, journey to get there. Um, and so I'm sitting in their lobby, putting my stuff in my bag, and this big black American guy, or not American, this big black guy is speaking French to these two models in the corner, and he's staring at me. And I'm just thinking to myself, please don't come over and start speaking to me in French because I don't understand French. Sure enough, he starts walking towards me and he speaks to me in perfect American English. He goes, "Hey, you're from Chicago, right?" I was like, "Yeah, I was just in Chicago." He goes, "Yeah, I remember you. I've seen you. I'll never forget a face." He goes, "I'm a photographer here in Paris, but I'm from Chicago."
Oh my God.
And what happened? Did they end up representing you? I said, "Nope." He said, "Okay, well, I want you to follow me." So I follow him out of that office. We walk into the hallway, and then on the same floor, we walk down the hallway to the next office door, which apparently is another agency.
Mm.
And we walk in, and I get the impression that he wants to introduce me to another agent. But when I walk in, I see these two people standing with their backs to me, and one of them looks a little bit familiar. So she turns around. It's somebody from my college who I did a fashion show with in college. She goes, "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" And I was like, "What are you doing here? I just landed." And
That's
so
crazy.
turns out she had been there modeling for like a year, and she had the whole thing set up. And she says, "Where are you staying?" I was like, "I don't really have a place. My stuff is at some hostel." And her friend had, his mother had a place in one of the best parts of Paris, and she had just left town for 3 months. So he offered her mother's place to me. The agent that the man wanted to introduce me to ended up representing me. I ended up inheriting this
Wow.
whole group of friends. All this happened within an hour and a half of me landing in Paris. And now remember, I had to give up 2 flights in order to have that quote spontaneous interaction. And again, it was just another reminder that our responsibility is really just to take that initial leap and to
Mm.
step into that expansive place and not worry so much about how it's all going to come together. Just keep trusting that even
Mm.
though it's not time to check into the hostel, and even though, you know, they ended up using you on the flight, or even though whatever happened,
Wow.
it's all divinely guiding you and navigating you towards where you're supposed to be, provided that you're following that voice of inner guidance from a very genuine and sincere place.
You've mentioned a couple times, and just in telling that story about, and throughout our discussion, this idea of trust,
Mhm.
right? Trusting in the universe, trusting that still small voice. Um, and I think it's so much easier to sort of, like that voice of fear is so loud, like you were saying. How did
Mhm.
you come to trust that voice?
I would say that it started off with the fact that I have very supportive parents.
Mm.
So I didn't have parents who told me, this is what you have to do. They encouraged, they're not perfect parents. Don't get me twisted, don't get it
They're
wrong. But
human
yeah, they're
parents.
human. But they encouraged us to, explore whatever our curiosities were. And I know that not everybody
Mm.
has that kind of upbringing. You
Mhm.
have a lot of people have parents who have imposed their will onto them. And so it's very difficult to let that voice of curiosity sort of run the show, which I felt like was my experience growing up. Like I got to dabble in a bunch of stuff and try this and try that, and not feel ashamed because, I wanted to spend the afternoon painting or drawing or creating things out of poster board. So I would say it started there,
Yeah.
and perhaps, my sacred spiritual agreement was that, hey, you're going to be a teacher one day, so you need to know what it feels like to have full access to that that voice. And so that's just how my path kind of played out. So I
Yeah.
don't I don't have a definitive moment or anything like that, but I will say that one of the one of the biggest benefits for me when I started meditating was the quality of that voice got more refined, like dramatically more refined. And I got a chance
Mm.
to see how it was before I was meditating on a consistent basis, and then after. And now it's like it doesn't even take trust. Like you don't need to trust that the shower is going to get you clean because you've taken a
Hmm.
shower so many times. You know it's going to get you
Yeah.
clean. You know that
Yeah.
there's a sequence. You got to go, you got to turn the water on, got to get it to the right temperature. You stand in it, you use soap, you do it for 10 minutes or so, you get out, you dry yourself off, and you move on. That none of that
Mm.
experience requires any trust. And when you can get to that place with your intuition, then and you just know that, okay, it's telling me to go right, I'm going to go right. I don't care how glittery things are to the left, I'm going to go to the right. And that's just where my path has taken me. So getting to that point is really where you want to be, because then you don't have to ever
Mm.
sit there and waste time deliberating and negotiating and bartering and having to go and stick your hand in the outlet over and over and over and get
Yeah.
shocked in order to remember that you should have taken the right instead of the left.
Yeah, that reminds me that experience breeds confidence. And I know, listen, I listened to a whole bunch of your stuff, so I've heard lots of stories where you followed that intuition and had magical results on the other end. Do you mind sharing that story of you were stuck in traffic on your way to the yoga studio and there was something that was going on with the mirror?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, of course.
That was a
So
great story.
I was teaching yoga once I met that guy in the yoga class from New York. He became my
The
yoga
Aussie guy.
mentor, the Aussie guy, exactly. He became
Yeah.
my mentor, and and I ended up actually taking over his classes at the
Oh,
gym, at
you
Crunch
did.
Gym.
Wow.
And so my commute to that class was about 10 minutes. And I never forget one morning, I had the whole thing timed out. Like I would leave my house, get in my car, drive to the class and park, go up the stairs, right? And I would get there like 10 minutes before the class was supposed to start. And I was a
Mm-hmm.
stickler for punctuality because I didn't want to
Yeah.
send the message to my students that it's okay to show up late. I wanted
Right.
to start right on time and let
Yeah.
them know that it was going to start right on time.
Yeah.
So anyway, everything was going like clockwork this one morning. I get in my car and there's never any traffic on this street going to the gym, except this morning, bumper to bumper traffic. I'd never seen anything like it.
Wow.
So, like any good Los Angeles driver, I start zigzagging my way through the side streets, alleys down to this other street, and bumper to bumper traffic on the other street. Now, this is highly unusual. This never happens.
You're
So
like,
now
what's
I'm
going
sitting there
on?
stuck in traffic. I'm sort of anxious because it looks like I'm gonna be late. And you can't really, when you live in LA, you can't use traffic as an excuse because everybody knows that there's just traffic in general,
Right.
right? So there's nothing I can do. I'm just sitting there in traffic.
Oh,
And and then I get to the main intersection where if there was going to be something obstructing both of these streets, it would have been on this intersecting street. And so I get to the intersection and I'm looking and I'm you know twisting my head trying to find what's going on. Is there an accident? Was there construction? Was the president in town? Was there some crazy person in the middle of the street? Was there like a bank robbery? Like what is going on? And all of a sudden the traffic just spontaneously clears up. And I didn't see anything that I could use as an
mm,
excuse. So now
yeah.
I'm just late because there was just traffic. And I'm like pissed, right? And I
Terrible
get
feeling.
there, I'm like 10 minutes late and I'm running up the stairs, but then I stop and I walk slowly because I'm the yoga teacher. I have to be calm. I have to look. So I'm
Image
walking up.
management.
Right. I got my flip-flops on. And as I'm walking towards the room where the class is, it's like a glass exercise room. Everybody is huddled to the back of the room, which is really weird. And I walk in and I feel all this crunching underneath my flip flops. And I look down and there's like million shards of glass all over the floor. And I look up and in the middle of the front wall, which again, this is like the exercise room, the group fitness room. So obviously there's a wall of mirrors. There's one section like 3 feet by 9 feet tall that's missing. Apparently, what happened was at the beginning of the hour when the class was supposed to start, that middle part of the mirror, which is right where I would have been sitting, somehow just spontaneously dislodged and came crashing down. And because the teacher wasn't there, then the other people in the room weren't set up and
Oh
nobody got
my
injured.
God. That is
Thank God.
crazy.
So it turns out that phantom traffic jam that just appeared out of nowhere, that I
Yeah.
was cursing in my car.
Oh, you mean you weren't at peace?
No, it was actually saving me and who God knows who else from having a very unlucky start to our day. So that was a very fortunate thing because I got to actually see, there's a saying
Mm,
in the spiritual community, nature's rejection is nature's protection.
mm,
And I got to see exactly what I was being protected from in that
wow.
instance. And it again, it's just another one of those reminders that you're always on divine time. So now when I'm in an airport, when I'm in traffic, and it's not like, when I didn't, when I was being trifling or I didn't do my best, when I'm doing everything I can to get
Mm,
to where I want to go and it's not happening, I just remind myself, oh, the phantom traffic jam. Remember the phantom traffic jam. And then it
yeah.
allows me to relax and then you can be more present to whatever's happening and take advantage of whatever opportunities are around you in that moment.
Yeah, that's a beautiful lesson in trust that the universe is conspiring to support you. I love
100%.
that. Yeah. You have another story. I hate to keep asking you to tell stories, but
It's
a
so
long
fun
time.
to recall some of these stories.
Well, listen, you're gonna love this one. I hope you love this one as much as I did. But when I heard you tell this story about Gary Zukav, because the one thing I think the human experience is like we all get stressed out in traffic. I don't care how spiritual you are. Sometimes for me, it's like a gauge of how in alignment I am with my spirit is how I act when I'm driving. And
Mhm.
you were talking about, and I was like, oh my gosh, the airport and traffic, those are very common, stressors. It's hard to stay spiritual and trusting sometimes. But you told this story about traveling with Gary Zukav to the airport. Do you want to tell that
Mm.
story? So good.
You got the best stories. You listen to
Listen, I
all of
listen
them.
to all I listen to all the things.
So
These are my favorite
I
stories.
was in I was in Whistler. I was in Whistler, which is in Vancouver, which is just outside of Vancouver. And I was coming back from a wellness festival, and Gary Zukav, who wrote The Seed of the Soul,
Love
and
that
his
book.
yeah, his ex-partner, she passed away recently, unfortunately. We were
Oh, I
all
didn't know.
being driven to the airport, and we were all going to different places. So we had flights and everything, and there was all this traffic.
With Gary at peace.
Well, yeah, we were all kind of pretending like we were at peace.
We're
Put it that
pretending
way.
we're spiritual people.
Yeah.
Act natural.
But it was clear we weren't going to make it to the airport in time. So then I had this
Oh,
idea, well, maybe we'll go catch the subway and that'll be a faster way to get to the airport. And we're passing over this bridge. It's called like the Lions Gate Bridge or something in Vancouver. And it's like literally like height of rush hour. And I'm just sitting in the back seat and I'm just looking out the window. I mean, there's nothing I can do. So we're
mhm.
just inching along. And I see this little, it looks like something the size of an index card taped to the side of the bridge. And something is handwritten on there. And my eyesight isn't the best. So I couldn't really make out what it was, and it was really small, right?
Mhm.
And so I take a picture of it, and I figure I'll just enlarge it and see what it is later because I was just curious what it could have been. And I looked at it later. We eventually made it. We got on the subway. We made it to the airport in the nick of time. And it said when I was sitting at my gate waiting for my flight, I looked at the photo and I enlarged it, and it said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams."
Mhm. Yeah.
The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And I had no idea what it was, what it meant, why it was there. I didn't know if it was put there by someone who, you know, wanted to remind whoever was up that high on the bridge. I guess sometimes people jump off the bridge not to, to
Oh,
remember about the
right.
future, or if they
Yeah.
put it for people walking. There weren't that many people walking at that. It's a pretty like long bridge, and it was all cars for the most part.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I just wondered like how long it had been there and what, like somebody literally sat down because it had been taped because Vancouver's a very rainy place. So it had been taped
Yeah.
fully so that the rain didn't destroy it. I mean, somebody definitely thought about it. It was premeditated. And then I thought, what if what if somebody put it there just following their inner guidance, not knowing that somebody was going to be stuck in traffic, you know, coming from a wellness festival who writes daily dose of inspiration emails and would be inspired by that note to then share it with their list of 20,000 subscribers and put it in their book, Knowing Where to Look, and share it on podcasts like yours and Rich Rolls. I don't know, but that possibility just makes me a little bit more excited to consider. And again, it's another one of those reminders that your inner voice may have you doing things that you may think are insignificant. Like, who
Mm.
cares? Nobody's going to read this little note that I put up on this bridge, or nobody's going to read my little blog post or watch my little YouTube video. I only have 8 subscribers. But you just never know. You never
Yeah.
know where these things are going to go, and it's not your responsibility to know where they're going to go. Your responsibility is to follow what you feel is the right thing to do, what the expansive thing to do in this moment, and let the universe, or whatever you want to call it, nature's intelligence, take care of the rest.
That is such a big, I mean, and somebody wrote this thing and I would imagine that there had to be some hope there, hope that it would help somebody else.
Right.
Yeah. And they'll never know the
Never
impact
know.
that it had. And it ended up in your book and it keeps coming up and it's still, and listen, it's gonna, just this little idea of encouraging somebody to believe in their dreams. I mean, has had quite an impact in just a simple little note.
Mhm. It's an Eleanor Roosevelt quote I later discovered.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I love her. She's got a lot of good quotes. I could probably talk to you forever, but I realize I wanted to hear all your stories. And listen, you can hear all of, to those that are listening, you can hear all of Light's stories on the many episodes of Rich Roll, but you also have your own podcast,
Mhm.
which you have, I saw you had Chip Connolly. Was it Chip Connolly? Yeah.
Yep.
The
Chip has been on there. It's the Light Watkins Show.
The Light Watkins show. Yes, thank you. That's been really fun to listen to. I've listened to a few of those. You had a whistleblower on there recently. That was really powerful. Um, if someone's looking for you online, so we have the podcast. Where else can people
The
find you
hub
online?
is my website, lightwatkins.com. There you can find my online community, the Happiness Insiders. You can find my podcast. You can find my social media channels. You can sign up for
Nice.
my daily dose of inspiration email,
That's a
and
lot
you
of
can
things.
see all the
You're
books.
also your Instagram is really good. You do these little videos of just you sharing things,
Mhm.
which are so impactful. You'll probably see me commenting on your Instagram stuff.
Thank
Oh, it's so
you.
good. Sometimes you just need somebody. You've just seemed so plugged in, maybe from years of practice. I have to ask you, did your mama name you Light?
That's a whole other story. Uh, no, she didn't leave me light. I became light. I changed it to light in 2005.
Oh, okay. No, it seems very appropriate. I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if she did name you Light. That's awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. I really appreciate, if you just do so much to inspire others. You've been inspiring me and encouraging me from afar, even though you don't even know it. I love the work that you're doing. I think the next book I'm going to get, I just finished Travel Light, but knowing where to look seems like the appropriate next book for me. And I love that you narrate your own books. It's
Yeah,
so
I like
good.
narrating. It's a hard thing to do. I mean,
Is that
it's not like roofing or anything like that, but it's pretty hard, just as an
roofing?
author to read all of your books in a few days.
Well,
It's
you're a podcast host, so you're a talker.
true, 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 true.
Yeah, you're a
Yeah.
speaker. So listen, I love it when people read their own books. I
And I
really
just
feel like it
found
just,
out that one of my books, Bliss More, the How to Meditate book, is on Spotify. For those of you who have a Spotify account, this is not
it's
an
on
advertisement for
Spotify.
Spotify, but they just started showcasing
Oh,
audiobooks. So you can get the audio version there if you have an
oh,
account.
hell yeah. That'll be the that'll be the next one then. Oh my gosh, so much good stuff. I love the work that you're doing in the world. Thank you so much for
Thank
doing your
you.
own work as, you're leading by example, which I really appreciate. So, thank you so much. I'll leave links to all your things in the show notes so people can go to odatchat.com and get links to all of the things. But thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today and share all your wisdom with our listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.